Hello and welcome to yet another video from the Think Design Work Smart YouTube channel. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios, and today what I have for you is something that I haven't done in a while, which is a solo video where I talk about a topic which I hope will help raise the bar in our industry. Today's topic is inspired by a question that I received on Twitter about a week ago from Peter Koffler, also known as Kotkap. And his question is the following: do you have any material or book for experts on how to use intuition? For example, listen to it, tap into it, sharpen it, etc. And the reason why Peter is asking me this question is because I have done a bunch of research and trying to understand more on how intuition works, particularly in the field of design, to get inspired for how to make software design better and how to make software design decisions better. So I also think that this topic is quite fit because the date when this video will be published, it's the Global Day of Code Retreat, which is one of the ways which you can use to enhance your intuition as software designers and as programmers. By the way, in my mind, there's very little difference between a programmer and a software designer, because software designers for me are people who design using the material that is code. So basically programmers, and we'll see why in the next few minutes. So let's talk about intuition and about design intuition in particular. What is intuition? Have you ever wondered why certain decisions are taken very quickly and some decisions you need to think more about them and to analyze them in more detail? The reason for that is the structure of your brain. To put it simply, you have two different systems in your brain, systems called in the classic Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow, System 1 and 2. You have a system that is fundamentally dealing with fast decisions and a system that is fundamentally dealing with slower decisions. Now, fast decisions are very useful in evolutionary terms, since if you are in a desert and you hear a growl, you don't have time to analyze whether the growl comes from a lion or from a panther and what kind of animal it is and what family it's coming from and what color it is and so on. What you need to do is to run immediately. And so this is why this system has developed in time, and it's a very old system in the brain. Apparently it comes from a very long evolutionary line. Now this system has developed later on into decision making on a higher level as in the basis of intuition, and it's a system that's based on heuristics. So fundamentally what you are doing when you are using your intuition is using heuristics that have been saved, ingrained in your brain. And we'll see how these heuristics grow in time. Compare this with rational decision making, with the times when you actually spend a lot of time and analyze things, split them into smaller pieces, pick up alternatives or think about alternatives, and rationally compare the advantages and disadvantages of every alternative until you come up with one of them. This is probably what you do when you are making an important life decision, like buying a house. You'll put some kind of effort into making and going through this thought process, which tends to be quite long. So that's the main difference between intuitive decision making, which is fast, it's based on heuristics, but it may also fail. And the other the other type of decision making, which is rational, based on analysis, based on comparison between alternatives, based on advantages and disadvantages, and so on. I mean, unless you have a lot of money, you probably haven't bought a house just intuitively, just saying, oh, I want this house, it will just be good for me. You usually tend to think about these things better. You tend to look at more houses and figure out which one is the best for you. So the problem with intuition is that because it's based on heuristics, it is bound to fail, and it will fail in many areas. This doesn't mean that the system is wrong. The system is extremely helpful because the intuitive system helps you make quick decisions. And we'll talk about the advantage of this in a minute. But the main problem is that you have these contexts when intuition doesn't really work. When intuition either gives you an answer that it's not ideal, it may be a solution to your problem, but it's not the best solution, or it gives you a solution that is not valid for your problem. There are huge areas of decision making where this happens. For example, one that we have seen recently with this pandemic, people are not very good at probabilities and at random events. We try to assign a purpose to random events. We don't have a good relationship with randomness in general, and it's hard to understand probabilities. Probabilities are not a natural thing for a human being to understand. You actually need training to do that. All these areas of problems with intuition you can find in the study of logical fallacies. Many of the logical fallacies are actually things that are so ingrained in your brain that you make fast decisions without considering the alternative based on intuition. And because of that, in some very common cases, you will make some wrong decisions. And some examples of logical fallacies are, as I mentioned, one of them is randomness, assigning a goal to random events, because we naturally seek purpose in everything, and it's very difficult to accept that there are events that just happen without anybody having something against us, or against me as a person, or against us as a group. And this is the case with the pandemic, with the viruses, right? Viruses evolve. They don't necessarily want to harm us, they want to survive. And it so happens that sometimes they turn into a pandemic. And it's very easy then to come and say, oh, it's actually something that somebody produced them in a laboratory or something like that. But we need to be very wary of these attempts to ascribe a goal to something that is inanimate, doesn't have a goal. Another example of a logical fallacy, which is very common, is confusing correlation with causation. Or if two events happen one after another, it doesn't mean that the first one that happened actually will produce or produced the other. So what is good about intuition? Why do we still need it even in this complex environment? So it's obvious that we need intuition in an evolutionary environment. Do we still need intuition in the context of software design or in the context of management and business decision making? And the answer is yes, because intuition is very fast. Intuition is very fast, and because of that, it applies perfectly in any context where the cost of delay of a decision is higher than the results of a bad decision. It's often the case that I see with leaders in software development, the people I work with the most. They tend to overanalyze context. They tend to wait to have all the necessary information in order to make a decision. And this is based in their experience as software developers, where having more and more details is actually a good thing. But when you turn to leadership, you also release some of the control of the outcome. When you are a programmer and you write code, you control pretty much everything that can happen with that code. And generally, if it works on your computer, it's very likely that it will work on other computers, except, of course, weird problems or bad programming. But generally speaking, if it works on your computer, if it works on a second computer, most likely to work on most computers, not necessarily on all, but on most of them. So it makes sense in that case to understand the details and to control very closely what you are doing. You lose that control when you switch to something like software architecture, where you no longer have the control of how people write the code. You can influence it. You no longer have the control on the end result. So you need to take into account these problems. You need to make decisions faster so that you find the problems earlier, and you never know which will be the problems. This is the same with every complex adaptive system out there. So if you are running a software development team, this is something that will happen as well. If you want to improve something, let's say you want to introduce practices like automated testing or clean code, you introduce that practice, but you have no idea what will actually happen as a result, right? So you need to introduce this, and you need to watch the people trying to do this. You need to watch the outcomes and then correct the course during the development. And in this case, over analyzing and waiting to analyze a lot and just thinking about, oh, so what will happen if we introduce this practice? What are the good things? What are the bad things? What might happen good? What might happen bad? This is actually a loss of time, because you will never be able to figure out precisely what the results are. You just need to make the decision, apply that practice for a while, look at the results and adapt, and keep doing this until you reach a point where you actually have a stable rule in place. So a rule or a practice that all developers apply and that actually gives results for your context. Even more, this happens on a business level. If you are running a business, you know that you cannot control a lot about your business. You cannot control the behavior of your clients. You cannot control your competition. You cannot control the providers that you have. You cannot control the tools that you are using most of the time. So what can you control? The only thing that you can control is what you are doing and how you are working. And once again, this is a complex adaptive system where you need to make a decision quickly, and oftentimes you don't have all the necessary information in order to make the decision. In that case, the only thing that you can do is tap into your intuition and go with it and see what happens and review your decisions. So this is where intuition is very, very important. Intuition is a very fast mechanism for making decisions whenever the cost of delay in a decision is high, is higher than the actual cost of making a mistake. Even if you make a mistake in a business or in architecture, if you notice it fast enough, then you have plenty of time to adjust course, and then you make another decision, fast decision, and so on. Just sitting in a room and over analyzing things won't give you better results than going forward and iterating. And of course, it's a very complex topic, and so many other ideas apply here. You can do a bit of analysis. It's worth spending a lot of time trying to understand the problem, but not necessarily trying to find the best solution. So even if you are making intuitive decisions, it's worth waiting a bit until you understand the problem, not necessarily until you find the best solution. So this is where intuition can help. And one thing you notice about experts is if you talk to experts about a specific context and ask them, okay, so what would be your decision then? They will tell you, oh, so I will do A. And then you add a small detail and then they say, oh, but this changes everything. In that case, it's definitely B. And this can be extremely annoying when working with experts, but it's based in the fact that every single small detail in the problem description matters. So this is where you can get lost a bit and you can make mistakes regarding your intuition because the problem is not well understood. And this brings us to one of the interesting part, which is software design intuition. Whether you know it or not, you have an intuition for software design. Given a problem, you will make, in the context, you will make certain decisions and you'll favor certain decisions compared to other decisions. Now, where do these come from? How do you know to make certain decisions instead of others? How do you know to use a method instead of a class? How do you know to add a new parameter to a method instead of creating a new method with that parameter? How do you know all this? And the answer is it's based and it's grounded in experience. It's grounded in your experiences with code. Now, the problem with that we are having in software development is that our experiences with code are so incredibly varied that put together, if you take two programmers from very different fields, they will make completely different decisions without being able to explain the reason behind their decisions, because these decisions are automated. They haven't thought about them, they haven't put the necessary work to understand why certain decisions are better than others in certain contexts. And this is a huge problem in software development. This is one reason why we can not discuss code in a manner that is objective, right? There will always be some level of subjectivity. There will always be some level of, I prefer this instead of that. For example, I prefer not using semicolons and curly braces, right? But this is a preference. It's something that I prefer. It's not something that I cannot live without. I prefer having a certain type of indentation. I prefer using camel case for method and variable names and so on. These are personal preferences. These are fine. Every one of us will have some personal preference because we are different people. But on top of that, we have a number of things that should be objective in the way we design our software, and they often are not, because what we are doing as software developers is learning up to a certain level of expertise in university or courses or whatever we do, and then jump into a job and learn the intuition for software design in the jobs that we have and in the code bases that we see during our formative years in the career. And that's a problem. We are the only designers, software designers are the only designers who make decisions and only look at one option for their decision. If you ask somebody to design a chair, an industrial designer, they will come with at least 3, 4, 5 different versions for the chair once they understand the problem that you are trying to solve. But even when you have a very clear problem, a very clear context, you can still come up with 10 different variations of chairs, depending on the materials that you are using, depending on the strengths and many other things where you have variability. In software design, what we often do is pick the first solution that comes to mind, first solution that works, and if it works, then it's good enough. And we stop there. And that is not a good way of designing, because design is not only intuitive, it's not only for today. Design should only be for tomorrow, for after tomorrow, and for my colleagues that will change this code a year from now or 2 years from now. Design should not only be about making things work, but should also be about making things that are stable, writing code that is less likely to introduce bugs in 1 year, where a new programmer will join the team and will have to change that code. So how do you train your intuition? Sometimes you have to take this intuition and go against it. That's it. This is the only way to train your intuition. You look at some of the decisions that you make intuitively, and instead of going with the intuition, engage your frontal lobe, engage your logical decision-making process. And the way to do that in software design, and not only, is to imagine different paths, different solutions for the same problem. For example, if you are making a decision to add a new method into a class, what if you would have a new class that only has that method? Or what if you had just a lambda function? Or what if you had a library that contains that function? How are these solutions different? And what are the advantages and disadvantages? And actually work through the logical reasons and the rational and the objective reasons why one solution is better than other. Not only on your preference, but also on why adding a method in a class is better than writing a library that has that method. You can work within these principles and figure out what are the rules for design that you apply. And this takes me to code retreats, because what code retreats are actually about is about exploring the design space of a problem. You have the same problem, the problem is fixed, the problem is well known. But what you are doing is you are exploring the design space. You are exploring different solutions to the same problem. And even if the problem is so simple, seemingly so simple and so well known, you can still find 20, 30, 50 different solutions. Now imagine, take this to the next level into your own code bases, which are probably solving much more complex problems. And think how that would influence your code if you had the time and if you put the energy into figuring out what are the different possible solutions for every small problem from your code, because you need to take the bigger problem, split it into small problems, and for each small problem try to come up with 3 or 4 alternatives and then pick one that is objectively better. And of course we cannot do this all the time, and this is one reason why we need to train our intuition. We need to train our intuition because we need to make fast decisions often in our job as a developer. And these fast decisions are based in intuition. But if your intuition is built only upon your experiences, you have huge blind spots. You are missing a whole universe of potential designs because you haven't explored the design space enough. So what is a good solution here? Well, one solution is to pair with somebody else. When you try to make a decision, and this doesn't apply only to software design decisions, it also applies to life decisions, it also applies to, business decisions. Ask somebody else, present the problem and see what they have to say about it. But try not to influence them, just give them the context and the problem and wait for them to give you their thoughts. And then you can do whatever you want with those thoughts. Pair programming, right? You write code with somebody who has a different intuition. So you put your intuitions together and sometimes your intuitions clash, and then you have to go into this logical decision making and try to explain why a solution is objectively better than other. Mob programming or ensemble programming. Gather a bunch of people, put all their intuitions together, and then figure out what is a good way to solve a specific problem. So to go back to the question was how to use intuition, how to listen to it, how to tap into it, how to sharpen it. The short answer is when you have to make a decision where the cost of delay is higher than the cost of a mistake, go with your intuition. It's always better to go with your intuition rather than wait until you have all the necessary information and until you can make and find the perfect solution. Sometimes there are no perfect solutions, and sometimes waiting to have the perfect solution will just remove that solution from you, because your competition will move forward, somebody will buy the house that you wanted, and so on. How do you listen to it? I think that's pretty easy. You just go with the flow, and you accept that you will make mistakes. This is probably one of the hardest things to do for perfectionist software developers. Accept that we can make mistakes, accept that mistakes are a normal part of life, accept that we will learn from those mistakes and move on and live with those consequences and correct the outcomes. How do we sharpen the intuition? Again, this is not easy, but the only way to do this is to approach problems with what's called the beginner mind, or to bring other people's intuition into the mix. A beginner's mind is a state of mind in which you try to empty all your thoughts, all your preconceived notions. You look at the problem with new eyes and you try to explore the solution space. And this is something that you can practice, because often you cannot do it if you need to make quick decisions. You don't have the time to do this. Another option, of course, is to bring other people's intuitions. So ask for advice, pair, ensemble, have a group that makes decisions and so on, or at least that informs you of their opinions. So that's it. This is how you can use your intuition. This is how you can enhance your intuition. This is how you can sharpen your intuition. So I hope this was interesting to you, and I hope you'll have a great Global Day of Code retreat. And until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.